chapter 2. And at the same time, I want to tell you that in my conscience, I feel like we're going fast. So if you're thinking, well, that's pretty bad, if it's slow and if it's fast to you and slow to us, we kind of have a problem. So we're going to just do the best that we can. I will try to go faster than I would like, but you may have to just endure going slower than you may like. We've been looking at verses 18 through 25 in Genesis chapter 2, and we have been given special attention to what Moses explicitly makes the implication in verses 24 and 25 of this dramatic presentation of God's solution to Adam's problem in the garden of being alone. And so I will read again verses 18 through 25, but you will just expect, we'll give attention to verse 24 and 25. For here we are learning that marriage is the unchangeable, universal, and good creation institution that we must honor, pursue, and protect. Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. Then Yahweh God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." And out of the ground Yahweh God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought each to the man to see what he would call it, and whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him. So Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at the place. And Yahweh God fashioned the rib which he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This one finally is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, because this one was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." Well, last week we've been looking at what God instituted in the garden, solving, if you will, the problem that he purposefully had exposed in order that he would show what is this union between husband and wife. We therefore were able to see that God is the one who created his image in creation as this regal creature ruling over all other aspects of the created universe. God created them in two distinct forms: male or female, man or woman. We saw that in the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1. We were able to see that when God said, "Let us make man in our own image," verse 27, in the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Moses has already made clear to us there's no question about the ontological, fancy pants word for just saying like the being, like what you are in your essence, which is what actually gives you the distinctive place and value that you have before God and in creation. There's no difference in ontological value between God's image and one who is male and God's image and one who is female. But now in Genesis 2, we are able to see that God does have distinct purposes for the distinct differences that make men different from women, women different from men. It is not a sort of feature of nature. It is not a random chance of evolution that men are this way and women are this way. It is God's divine design that created man such that he needed woman and created woman from the man for the man. It's for this reason that you can take your bulletin and you'll turn there that you have taken from the Second London Baptist Confession a definition of marriage. I just put these in there from time to time so that we would be able to realize that people have been stating biblical truth and summary statements for a very, very long time, and we echo them. We're not inventing anything. And thus, the church has been making very clear this is what marriage is, which means there's things which others would say marriage could be, and we are saying it cannot. Here we are able to see Christians have been doing this, the church has been doing this, making statements of what marriage is, because God instituted marriage in the garden. And we read of this first marriage in Genesis chapter 2, and we learn that it is indeed a marriage that God himself officiated. Because Moses writes in verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And then verse 25 goes to what man and what wife? Adam, the man, and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. See, verse 24 teaches us that the union that God officiated between Adam and the woman, who we will find out later is called Eve, they were married. They became one flesh. Eve was Adam's wife. And so what we learn in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25, it is the first marriage. And we must understand God instituted marriage. God officiated the first marriage. And thus we must understand God defines what marriage is. We therefore must embrace, submit, pursue, and protect marriage as it is rendered to us. And so there are some things that I know they're obvious, but they're not so firmly grasped in our day, is we just have to reckon this. God is the one who instituted marriage. Therefore, God defines what marriage is, and God forbids what marriage is not to be. And to make sure we can understand it, I'm just going to say, so therefore, you do not define marriage. It's not yours. You can enter it. You can make covenants to someone of the opposite sex before God and be married, but you do not get to determine what marriage is. Your mama and daddy do not determine what marriage is. How well or poorly they conducted their marriage before you, it has no bearing on what marriage actually is. God is the one who instituted, he defines it, and we will therefore come to understand it, embrace it, pursue it, and protect it, knowing what it is according to God's design. It is also, therefore, necessary to say the state does not define marriage. In our country, in 2015, when our highest courts declared in a Bergefell decision that we are therefore, as a society, going to honor homosexual unions that are legal in the eyes of the states to be marriage, we will say, no, they are not. Because marriage is not the state's to define. God has instituted and defines marriage and not the state. We also need to determine the church also does not define what marriage is. If you are Roman Catholic this morning, thank you for coming to our church. We are Protestants. If you were raised as a Roman Catholic and you've converted to Protestant faith, you need to know that one of the differences that we have is what marriage is and what it is not. Roman Catholics say, well, the church and therefore church law, church courts determine what marriage is because it is a sacrament. It is a way in which God actually transfers saving grace to those who enter marriage through the church sanctioning your marriage. No, marriage was not instituted by the church. God instituted marriage. God defines what marriage is, and God, therefore, is the one to which everyone who conducts themselves in this world in realms that are only for marriage and in their marriage, you are accountable to God. Now, that's not to say that you should not be accountable to the church. It is not to say that you should not be accountable to your society and therefore your society's state and how you act in realms in which are only for by God's design marriage, but it is to say God is the one who defines marriage. Therefore, what we have learned, at least last week, we began seeing that marriage is unchangeable. It is not coming from culture. It is not coming from societies. It actually brings forth culture. Societies come from marriage. God, in Genesis 2, we read, created marriage as an institution that he ordained in mankind's innocency, that is to say, before the fall, before sin entered the human race and entered creation, God brought marriage, culture, society, civilization comes from marriage. It is also to make very clear it does not change from people to people, from group to group. So whether you are an American in 2025 or whether you are in some sort of non-Western nation 400 years ago, you're no more free than we are to determine what marriage is. Every person in every place in every period is bound to submit to marriage as God has designed. Violations of what marriage is in God's eyes are therefore transgressions. And so we've seen in that sense that it is unchangeable. And we are able to see from Genesis 2 these fixed features of what is required in marriage. Now, the expressions we will see, I will make cases for some of ours, the expressions of the unchangeable features of marriage can differ and do differ and have differed and will differ. But these unchangeable elements of marriage do not. So when we were considering last week, we saw that marriage requires a man to leave his father and mother. That's what Moses makes as the explicit inference from God creating and then presenting woman to Adam. Moses says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother. In my mind, I think we covered that, though I am tempted to go and make far more applications. Practical applications of what this means are most valuable to understand, but for the sake of time, we move forward. So today we begin seeing that this unchangeable institution that God created in man's innocency is not only that it requires a man leave his father and mother, it requires that a man cleave or hold fast to his wife. Please note, verse 24 makes this very clear. And cleave, or your translation may say, hold fast. And please see how wonderfully clear and simple it is to his wife. This is the physical, and it is, in one sense, it is the priority that now defines the relationship between the husband and his wife once they have married. It is going to be, in one sense, an expression that is physical, it is tangible. You can measure it in one sense by how one acts through weeks and months and years, that there is fidelity. So, this cleaving or holding fast to one's wife is that a husband now physically and with all of his priorities expresses his fidelity to his wife. He holds fast to the woman whom he has made a covenant with before God, and two, that it will be exclusively to her that he will cleave. This is what Adam and Eve did, and the moral comment that God gives to it is in verse 25. The man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. See, all that was required for Adam to be married to Eve and its physical manifestation had absolutely no shame, for it was wholly, totally good. A husband is to cleave to the woman who is his wife. For a woman to become a man's wife, I do need to make this explicitly clear, that means you must marry her. That does not mean you get serious about her. That does not mean that you give her an engagement ring. That does not mean that you just tell her that you love her. That means that you marry her. Now, this is where expressions can differ, and they have differed, they do differ, they will differ from people to people, place to place. How does that work? And I am absolutely persuaded of what has been given to us. I'll just call it Protestant ceremonies related to this creation institution. They indeed reflect what is required here. But what we have to understand is there must be marriage for a man to cleave to his wife. And if you have not married her, you better not cleave to her or act like you can cleave to her. You cannot. You should not. You ought not. For when you do, you are in violation of God's institution of marriage. If she has not become your wife, any treatment of her as if she is your wife and should give to a man only as his wife, you are transgressing. Right now, I'll let your parents, for you younger ones, your parents can parse out the details of this, but you need to think in terms of there's many implications of what I have just said. And I'll just want to make sure you're just dealing with just practical life. That means how you talk to a woman. If you are not married to that woman, you surely don't need to talk to that woman as if you have any business in God's eyes bringing up certain topics. That means how you treat her, which includes how you touch her, which namely means how you ought not. So, to hold fast to your wife requires that you marry her. Now, we'll move forward, but we do need to see that it's necessary for us, for we do not live in mankind's innocence. And most of us can unfortunately confess, I sure did not conduct myself in any kind of God-honoring way before God saved me. But we do need to see that this is good. And while in one sense, most of those in this room who are members in our church have understood that this often tends to be the way in which our sinful flesh in rebellion against God and in perversion of his good gifts. We have rebelled against him. We have transgressed against God. The very fact that God commands a man to leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, it is good. It is glorious. That physical sexual union between a husband and his wife is indeed God's design. And please, let's make very clear, that is why a husband is male and a wife is female. It is a metaphor, and it's not a metaphor. A one flesh union is actually made manifest. Those covenant vows that one makes all dressed up and pretty and nice in a church building, I would suggest. But those, in one sense, are consummated in a non-metaphorical union of husband and wife. And the absolute insanity that has taken place not only in our incredibly lost society, but even amongst Christians that would say that there could be in any way a sanction of unnatural relations that in no way can have a consummation of a one flesh union. If you in any way can think that that is palatable for the Christian mind and heart, you need to speak to me. I won't talk to you like this. I'll be settled down and we'll have a conversation. But you need to understand there is a war with God and what he has given in marriage and the creation of man and woman for the very purpose of a husband taking a woman to be his wife, and that they may cleave to one another in that constant, almost sacramental expression of their marriage covenant that even God gives life from. So I am trying to make very clear that better smell like the rancid poison that it is when you hear people talk about same-sex unions should be seen as equal to the marriage. Now, in our church, just if you don't know our church and you're coming in today, thank you. You may think like, my goodness, they have their kids in here. They are crazy. I'm wearing a tie. Like, where did these people come from? You've dug them up out of the grave somewhere. Or you probably don't think that like we have in our families, in our extended families, people whom we love who are in these relationships. There are families in our church who are just trying to navigate. How do I navigate loving my cousin, loving my son or my daughter, loving my sister or my brother? And they are actively pursuing what I just hopefully made very clear should be condemned. So we're not talking about this as if this isn't something that families in our church are having to figure out. And I personally want to take this opportunity to commend the families that are doing the most difficult thing, because it's really easy to preach from a pulpit. But to sit down, or to try to sit down and to communicate to her son or a daughter, we cannot and we will not affirm what you are doing, what you are pursuing, and what you think is your identity. And therefore, their child, their sibling cuts them off. I cannot imagine how hard that is. And yet, families in our church are having to figure out, how do I truly love someone and honor God? But I want us to see Scripture makes very clear that God has instituted marriage to be when a man, not a woman, a man leaves his father and his mother and he cleaves to his wife. Those are not interchangeable. it must be a man marrying a woman for the one flesh union of marriage to occur. This is also why, and I would really want you to love being a Protestant. This is why Protestants have said, indeed, marriage is not a sacrament. However, God is pleased. God is pleased when you marry, and God is pleased when you consummate those vows as much as you possibly can and please God. See, the sacrament of the Roman Catholic Church was, in one sense, we'll just say the language that they used was in the carnal act. Well, the Protestant view is no, God instituted marriage, and therefore that, in one sense, the repeated consummation of those vows of that marriage, it is glorious to God, and that's exactly what verse 25 says. That's why it's right to say, what kind of Protestants? They walk in, they see all these children, they're like, what kind of church are y'all? We're a Protestant church. We just happen to be a passionate Protestant church. And this is what happens, right? Praise God when he chooses to bless our marriages and the passion that we have in our marriages. And you need to understand that's the design. Like, that's good. So when your children they're watching you, husbands, they should be watching you. You should be appropriate, but you clearly should think, I love my wife. And my love for my wife is not like my love for any other woman in the universe. And even children can pick up on that's different. That like daddy and mama is not like daddy and anybody else. And if you ever see daddy treating any other woman like he treats mama, children should be able to think that's not right. It is a glorious thing that God has said that a man in marriage is to cleave to his wife. And then we therefore are able to see that as Protestants, we love this institution as we should love all of the institutions that God has given to us. They indeed are for our good. And this meets the third element of the unchangeable nature of this institution. When a man marries a woman and she becomes his wife, he becomes her husband, they have become one flesh. This is exactly what is taught, is it not? The third part of verse 24 that Moses makes explicit is for all people at all times, that a man leaving his father and mother, cleaving to his wife, they shall become one flesh. This is that crazy biblical math. 3 actually equals 1. 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 1. Like, that's really hard to explain. And yet there is one God who exists eternally in 3 persons. So in marriage, there is 1 plus 1 that equals 1. This unity of husband and wife is called here a one flesh reality. This really communicates the nature of what marriage is. Marriage has a necessary corresponding seal and sign in the physical union of consummation between a husband and his wife. Thus, that's how Protestants have communicated for hundreds of years. When a man vows before a crowd of witnesses and a woman vows before this crowd of witnesses that they give themselves to one another in holy matrimony, they then consummate those vows. That indeed is the one flesh sign and seal of the nature of their relationship now. Therefore, all that comes from this one flesh union is only for the husband to know and share with his wife. And it is only for the wife to know and share with her husband. This is why, in one sense, and we'll see this throughout Genesis, when we actually get to the law, when we come to God saying things like, thou shalt not, and we'll see that sixth commandment is going to forbid any kind of sexual immorality. It actually is, it's already been founded, the foundation of it has already been established. So, in one sense, we are able to know by Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, anything other than a husband and wife being in a one flesh relationship. If you're trying to have that kind of relationship outside of marriage, you are at war with God and what He instituted marriage to be. This one flesh union, which is the physical seal and consummation of a husband and wife coming together in marriage, indeed is the material expression of what marital love is, and it also is the means by which God gives life. Now, if we could, we would go and see that marriage is instituted by God in man's innocence, and woman is provided for the man, being from the man, to actually be the remedy for man being alone, so that man is able to accomplish the mission of being fruitful and multiplying, because God has provided for him the woman. But after the fall, we find out that sin wrecks us at the very center of this very institution and at the very heart of man. And therefore, what comes to be a constant issue in the life of all people, but including God's own elect, is violations of this institution. We call that sexual immorality. And therefore, what comes to be taught clearly by the apostles is that the institution of marriage is also God's gift to fallen human beings, that the very nature that God made you, which has a sexual desire, God has given to you the good institution of marriage for it to be, it's to be housed there. It's not to be known outside of marriage. And so it's for that reason people have rightly said, there's three good benefits from marriage as an institution. It's for life, that is for procreation. It's for the proper order of society. And it also is the proper satisfaction of sexual desire in marriage. Amen to all three of those. But here we are able to see that this is before man has fallen. Marriage is not designed by God just to deal with sinful human beings. It is not just to somehow quench passion. No, it was created when Adam and Eve and their passions were only holy. And so in that sense, marriage has this unique place as the institution that God created before the fall. And so this marital love, therefore, is unique because we are able to see in marriage there is an exclusive and effective love between a husband and his wife that is manifest in all of the blessings and privileges and duties that come in marriage. Any aberration to this, and therefore all aberrations of this, they are immoral. Again, I'm trying to speak very plainly. That means fornication is always immoral. It is always a violation of God's law. It is always sin against God. Pornography is always sinful. It is a violation of God's good design for creation. It is war with this institution of God. Adultery is immoral. God has created a husband to know his wife, a wife to know her husband, and knowing someone outside of marriage is violation of this covenant. It is war with God. Now, I think that's kind of low hanging fruit. So, but there's some other ones that are maybe not as easily understood to be as sinister as they are. And I was encouraged. I was reading John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion last night, and he also says this in far more articulate ways than me. But if you have an attitude and a disposition against marriage, which I have learned that there's this thing called the manosphere. So some of you young guys can tell me about this thing. And basically what it sounds like is dudes talking to one another on the internet. And that's a thing because there's a lot of men who are not for marriage. That is rebellion against God. That is a rejection against the institution that God has given for humanity, that is instituted explicitly in verse 24, that men are made to leave their father and mother and to take and therefore cleave to their wife in this one flesh union. Those are the three unchangeable distinctives of marriage. Men are not made to reject marriage as not for them. Jesus did teach that it's difficult to take, but Jesus said there are eunuchs for the kingdom. But John Calvin, and I wrote it out just so that I would be able to make very, very clear. John Calvin says that this particular gift, they had an old word for it contingency, I think is how they rendered it. But he said that particular gift, what it was taught to me as singleness, he says it is an exceptional gift which is not given indiscriminately to his whole church, but to very few of its members. Persons who have become a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom are to concentrate more freely upon serving God's glory. I can say the manosphere does not exist because they are serving God's glory by talking to dudes on the internet. A disposition against marriage by men, for whatever reason you could concoct, is a violation against this institution that God created in our innocence. Therefore, you have to reckon with this. Marriage is for you. Yes, there are exceptions, and that's exactly what they are, exceptions. Marriage is for you. Likewise, I am told, I don't know if there's a word for it. Maybe one of you young ladies could tell me what the word is, but there is a growing number of women who do not want to be married. Part of this is, in one sense, enabled by the fact that you can have children out of wedlock. So that therefore, as a woman, you can have the satisfaction of what your body emanates to you. You are made for, that is to bear children. But you don't have to be married to do that. So therefore, you can, in that sense, have your cake and eat it too. In a society that does not restrict the rightful sexual relation between a man and a woman, then you're able to see, like, well, then you can do that and not necessarily marry. Likewise, women, you have been told, an incredibly sophisticated pile of rubbish, that you need to have a career that's like a man. You need to compete with like a man. You don't need a man. And I just have to tell you that Genesis 2 narrates woman was made from man and for man. And in case you have some like pockets of feminism within you that are like not convicted by God's word, let me just say it this way. If you as a woman defined yourself as not being made by God for a man, you have an unbiblical understanding of why God created mankind as either male or female. Wrestle with that. Now, we don't live in the garden. And there are so many incredible women who desire to be married and they want to be a wife and a mother. And God has not provided a man to do that. There are men who desire to marry, and God has not provided that. The fact that we do not live in a perfect world with perfect people does not mean we are given some kind of prerogative to change what marriage is. We are not given a freedom to redefine what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and what it actually is for when you are a man and when you are a woman. But we definitely live in a age and a culture and a society that it is hard to find sort of expressions of this that help us as a people. But I do think you can see some of these things that are present when you go and you see a traditional wedding ceremony. There should be things that just by way of the liturgy should be offensive. That is offensive to someone who rejects this institution as narrated for us in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. Because what happens in a traditional Protestant wedding ceremony is a father, if he is living, or a brother, if there is one, but a man walks that bride down the aisle. A man who has authority to, when asked after the marriage covenant has been explained publicly to all of the witnesses there, this is what marriage is. These are the terms. Are you agreeing to the terms of this covenant? And then the officiator will ask, who gives this woman to be this man's bride? And whose voice do you hear? Now, today they say, her mother and I. But all it takes is for that father to say, I do. And when, like, feminism is like you're just shaking with, like, I hate that. That came to us. That's the way our forefathers brought it to us. And it's not an accident. Thomas Cranmer knew what he was doing when he wrote the Common Book of Prayer and wrote out this kind of liturgy. It is reflective of the organization that God created in the garden, that even when God presented to Adam Eve, if God chose to say it to himself, who presents this woman to this man? It would have been God who said, I do. And then when they exchange vows, I understand in this egalitarian soup that we live in, they seem to be the same. But you go read old vows, they are not the same. Even things just I'm purposely wanting to find if there is within you a rebellion against what these verses teach in the form of feminism. I'm wanting to put my finger on it and make you feel it. In the old vows, it was like, with my body I thee wed. Which meant you exclusively could not give your body to anyone other than your husband or your wife. But yet in marriage, you vow to give yourself exclusively to him or to her. That was public. Everyone understood. The man then promised that he indeed would give himself in every season of his life for her. Exclusive love manifest in protection, in provision, in care. And she then does the same, but she then will include submission. In the old vows, do you know it's not even submission? Get your nerve ready. It's obey. I just want to make you very aware, like aberrations to those vows in marriage are modern inventions. They do not have historical reference to sort of, no one has rediscovered them. Revolutionaries have invented them. See, marriage is a man leaving his father and his mother, cleaving to his wife, for they are one flesh. Now, this is why the issue of divorce, which we will not take up in this series, is so incredibly difficult. It has been difficult for the Christian church since the beginning, and it still continues to be. But I would want everyone who is married today, and a whole host, we have past marriages. We're not in the ideal. But if you are married today to the one who is your husband or wife today, you are in a one flesh union with them. God has joined you together. And therefore it is right for, as the traditional announcement is, let no man tear asunder. That you need to understand that the one flesh union that I have with my spouse today is to be divided by God upon death. God will dissolve this union. That's what one flesh requires. You don't come ripping my arms off and find me like, oh man, thanks. I really appreciate that. And you don't go ripping spouses from one another and find it to be any different. Because it is a one flesh union. And it is not only in that sense a union of one flesh by way of bodies and finances and the function of a household. There is even a spiritual dynamic that Paul makes very clear. That's why sexual sin is different than other sins. This is the universal elements of marriage because of what we have read in Genesis chapter 2. And it's good. It is good. Now, at least everyone that I know well enough in this church, no one has entered into marriage, although we do have some of our younger, I'm not going to name names, but I'm so proud of some of our young people. Or I will name some names. Ed and Hannah, I'm proud of y'all. Thane and Stacy, I'm so proud of y'all. If I'm forgetting you right now, please know I'm just forgetting you. All right. But if I conducted your marriage and did your premarital, like, oh man, y'all are there are blessings that are going on in these young people, and you live in such a filthy, immoral land. But the majority of us, we did not come into marriage as holy ones. We were defiled. We were unclean. If you were just going to judge us by what we had done, we were rebels against God. We were thinking that we could get into marriage doing it our way, defining it how we wanted to do. And then many of us, we've soiled the marriages that we're in. And I'm saying this to say, take heart. God is gracious. God forgives sin and iniquity. And God, and we can give illustrations, God in this church has brought marriages that would have been ruined by sin to be restored and made to be exemplary. I'm not talking like one. We can give multiple marriages in our little church. So where you find yourself today, I do not want you to think that you didn't define it, nor are you outside of God's ability to restore it. God is able to make your marriage reflect his good purposes through the gospel of Jesus Christ as the Holy Spirit enables you to do what God calls you to do. And you can, for the rest of your life, it will not be easy, but you can, for the rest of your life, pursue the wonderful good blessings that God gives in marriage. So take heart. The grace of God does incredible changes to sinners, including married ones. But also, let us know marriage is God's institution and it is unchangeable. Next week, we will get through universal and good. If you have questions about what I've said, come and talk to me. Don't go to the other elders. They didn't say the things